Inside Our Mind is the flagship podcast of Mind Research Institute. We're a neuroscience, education, and social impact organization whose mission is to ensure that all students are mathematically equipped to solve the world's most challenging problems. In each episode of Inside Our Mind, we take a look at the issues and challenges facing education that we're working to address through research, technology, and strategic initiatives. Welcome to Inside Our Mind. Welcome once again to the Inside Our Mind podcast. I'm Brian LeTendre, the content manager for the engagement team here at Mind. And before we get into the heart of today's show, I wanted to first thank everyone who checked out the first episode of the podcast. The feedback that we've gotten so far has been great, and our first episode has only been out for a few weeks now. Since that first episode, we've made it easier for you to find our show and to share your thoughts and feedback with us. We're now on Apple Podcasts and Google Play Music. And in addition to Facebook and Twitter, you can email us directly now at podcasts@mindresearch.org. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. We'll also be bringing the show to more platforms in the future, so stay tuned for updates. With that bit of housekeeping out of the way, let's dive into today's topic, personalized learning. Now, with a topic as broad as personalized learning, we could do an entire year-long podcast series and not touch on every facet of it. And to be sure, we'll talk about personalized learning plenty of times over the life of this show. But much like we did in our episode about EdTech evaluation, this initial conversation is about addressing personalized learning misconceptions, as well as equipping educators and administrators with questions to ask when designing and implementing a personalized learning model. To do that, I recently sat down with Brandon Smith, our lead mathematician here at Mind Research Institute. Brandon is a passionate advocate for mathematics both inside and outside of the classroom. He designs mathematical requirements for our game-based ST-Math software, defines mathematical schema, creates family math night experiences, consults with our professional development team, and has developed exhibits for math fairs and math camps. Prior to joining us, Brandon was a college instructor where he won an Outstanding Teacher Award and was the educational liaison for the city of Costa Mesa to Wyndham, Australia. Brandon has a bachelor's in math and 2 master's degrees in pure and applied mathematics. One of the key themes that Brandon hit on in the discussion that you're about to hear is the idea that in trying to become the antithesis of one size fits all, you can actually create the antithesis of personalized learning. He also talks about how you can avoid that pitfall by asking the right questions and having clear goals in mind when implementing a personalized learning model. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Mind's Brandon Smith. Thank you very much for joining me today, Brandon, and taking some time out to talk a bit about personalized learning, because I know this is a conversation that, we've had a couple of times off the air. And one of the things that comes up around personalized learning, anytime it comes up as a term, is just how many misconceptions are out there and sort of misunderstandings of it, because personalized learning has become such a buzzword. And do you find that it's a term that the more people use it, it seems like the less they actually understand it?
Yeah, I think what happens so often, at least in my experience, is we get excited about a new rhetoric or a new way to talk about the problem because we're all wanting to solve it. And we start to see glimpses of potential. We get really excited, we get full of optimism, and we start to see a couple of examples of what we think personalized learning or any other buzzword is, but we don't really sit down and say, well, what's the goal? What is it trying to do? In order to know the misconceptions about it, we're going to want to know what some of the positive conceptions about it are.
Absolutely.
And if we just get something to get really popular, it literally becomes a buzzword that becomes a cliche. And so what is really exciting because, as we continue to make more advances in learning and the use of technology to really take learning up a level that we might not have had before the technology, having these deep dives into what is it, what should it be, what is it trying to do, where did it even start, where did it come from, I think are all really important. And if all of us joining the podcast and listening can start to get more of this lens of problem-solving approach. I hear a word, but what is it trying to do?
Right.
That helps us not just take what I like to call the shotgun approach.
Yep.
where we say learning is struggling and students aren't at the level of math perceptions and the level of math achievement that we're looking for. So that's where we get terms like the opportunity gap, the achievement gap, the perception gap. Students aren't there. And people are different, but yet our education always looks the same. And so we say, well, one size fits all doesn't work. So maybe what we want to do is just do all kinds of stuff that isn't one size fits all. And personalized learning now kind of fits that mold of being the antithesis of super traditional education. But that doesn't mean that just because we want to go anti one size fits all, that I can do anything I want. We still want to explore the unknown of how to solve this problem in education in productive and targeted ways. And so hopefully we can help unpack some of those, at least from my perspective, and really have a powerhouse experience for people on personalized learning.
And I think you hit on such a great point there. And I think that this idea that when there is a concept that seems outdated or sort of obsolete, that we tend to swing totally in the opposite direction, even from like a guideline standpoint and a regulatory standpoint. My background is in early education and care, and I know embedded in our regulations when I was working with childcare providers around education and curriculum and things like that, everything was about meeting the individual needs of each child, making sure that we're tailoring the experience to each child. And I think that then gets interpreted in this sort of knee-jerk way to be the opposite of everything that we've known before. And like you said, everything in the middle kind of gets lost.
Yeah. In trying to be the antithesis of one size fits all, sounds weird, but we actually also become the antithesis of personalized learning.
Right.
Because we don't necessarily take a targeted approach of, we know that education is broken in the sense that students are coming out of school oftentimes without the depth of understanding that all of us see, without the appreciation and the beauty of mathematics that educators can see and feel. We all know that dissonance. We can all feel that dissonance. But the question to me always is, what do we do about it? So what are the issues at play? And let's target those. And so personalized learning now, instead of just being a blanket term for anything that's non-traditional, I think can really become a term about making learning personal. So personalized learning requires that learning is happening. And so really to have personalized learning isn't just to say you get to choose what you learn or you get to spend time creating an environment in which you learn. It's almost like if you were really into cars and I have a word problem about apples and oranges and I turn that into cars and motorcycles, that doesn't mean that you automatically can solve the problem any better. I haven't given you any tools. If you can solve the problem, whether it's apples and oranges or anything else, it's pretty much equally enriching or not enriching for me.
Right.
What happens if I can't? If I can already do it, I'm not having a learning experience at that moment. What happens when I can't do it? In the moment that I am stuck, that's the moment that learning is happening. And personalized learning now has to be something that really drives and focuses on that moment of learning. And in particular, the moment of if I'm having a misconception or an error, or even I might not know that I have it right. So it's an important piece in learning to get the feedback that I'm on the right track.
And I think you hit on two great misconceptions there, and also that point. Number one, on the positive point about where that moment is happening, where that learning is happening. But the misconceptions that you hit on are one, that choice does not alone create personalized learning, and having an environment doesn't alone create personalized learning. And so sometimes those approaches to quote unquote doing personalized learning, people take and glom onto those particular concepts and think that that's what it means.
At least that's the way that we've enacted it. So what I mean is oftentimes a lot of us get really excited with having an innovative viewpoint on something. But usually when we have the viewpoint, it's low risk for us. We have an innovative viewpoint, meaning we're kind of a rebel against the culture or whoever it is that's responsible for the decision.
Right.
I'm going to be brilliantly countercultural. And so an innovative viewpoint is one thing, but what we want to be looking for are targeted and innovative actions that don't just give me a new opportunity to learn, but they actually achieve new learning results. And so if choice alone was enough, what that means is it doesn't matter how I learn as long as I just choose what it is I get to learn.
Right.
But there's going to be things in life where we might not want students or anybody to make the choice of if they learn it or not. So reading and speaking, we would all say that those are very practical skills. And so personalized learning can't be choice. If it was, then we would just say, oh, it's totally fine if some people chose not to learn those. With the environment, there is a level of environment that is important to learning. So environment that builds mindsets that failure is okay. In fact, it's expected. It's why humans always fall before we learn how to walk. Ingrained in the human experience from the moment we're born is learning by doing, by early failures being important stepping stones to later success. So if you're creating an environment where failure is always punished, where every time I'm practicing something, I'm always getting a grade for it or something like that, then you are creating an environment that's against learning. And so creating an environment that instills positive mindsets to show that learning math is not something that's like alien or unhuman, that we can take a human approach to learning math just like learning anything else. Those components of environment are really important. But what I get at with environment, I think you were hinting at as well, is if I'm spending time looking at this fun world, and then every so often I do a math problem, learning didn't happen until the math problem was there. And
right.
At least the learning of the math didn't. So if exploring the world is not inherently a mathematical experience itself, you're spending duty cycle, students making a choice what they explore in that environment, but their task on hand is so minimal that you don't get much out of it. It has to be personalized at the moment that those decisions are being made. Learning by doing doesn't mean being active when I learn. It means doing the pertinent tasks for learning to happen. And each one of us are going to approach a problem with different conceptions, different misconceptions, different life experiences. And because of that, we might have different early successes or different early failures. And so personalized learning needs to tailor for the array of decision-making and responses that a student might make and make sure that the interaction in that moment is really important. So it's not just the environment that goes kind of counter personalized learning.
Right.
Things like watching a video and being able to hit rewind. If I already know it, the enrichment of the video might not be that much. What happens when the student doesn't know it? And let's say they go through a part of the video and they're stuck. They have a misconception that they haven't been able to act on and see the result of their decisions and how that played out. The only choice they have is to go back and rewind.
Right.
And when you do that, you hear the exact same thing again. And so many of these things, we say personalized learning, we end up using that as a blanket term for cool stuff computers can do. And really what we should be analyzing is, what is a computer or technology of any form doing that's really going to help me, and holding ourselves accountable for those learning outcomes. Oftentimes we hold ourselves accountable for using the fun rhetoric, but do we really hold ourselves accountable for that true learning to happen? So one example for me is one of the big things that comes to mind when I think personalized learning, at least kind of in the marketplace right now, is it's almost always set in the context of technology, which it doesn't have to be. And it's very often used in the world of adaptivity. But if you look at what the adaptivity is doing, in most of the cases, all it's doing is telling the computer to choose what the student sees. It's placement. What should you see? What do you not need to see? But in that moment, if I am consistently overestimating something or underestimating something, what do I do beyond the same hint that I saw the last time I was here when I was placed before? And so personalized learning can't happen just with placement alone. It's not that placement is bad. It's that it's not strong enough to encompass really what personalized learning is trying to do.
And so do you feel like that's where there's often missteps, is that there's too much of a focus on placement, and so that is weighed too heavily in that process?
Yes. I think the way that I would kind of classify it for myself is personalized learning is very focused on variety, regardless of what it is. So I can make an avatar. I can customize that avatar to have hair. I personally would love to do that since I have none.
Same.
You look great, by the way.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to select the environment in which I work. I want to choose the problem I'm working on. Choice, choice, choice. variety. We think with personalized learning that variety is the spice of life. And so one form of variety, which is an important form, is placing students where it is they need to be. And so that is important, and placement is a key piece. But if we're so focused on variety, we really miss what personalized learning can do. It needs to make learning a personal thing. If we go a little extreme on this idea of variety and personalized learning, we start to have conversations about learning styles. And it's still very common for us to think, well, my learning style is different than your learning style.
Right.
But we've debunked that. Just because you have a preference when you select from a menu how you want to learn something doesn't mean learning is actually improved because you use it. And so we spend so much time on variety because one size fits all feels robotic. But I don't think you have to. There's a step here where you want learning to be a human experience and a non-robotic experience. But I don't just throw any and everything out. Personalized learning to me is student-centered learning. It's not about what I learn. It's about how I learn it. And that piece is often missed when we do all that variety. And so that's where I think the reason EdTech has such a push on personalized learning is it's a very scalable environment to provide variety.
Right.
But variety itself could just be confused as a shotgun approach, hoping that something eventually sticks.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, that environment in terms of the environment itself not being enough. And that to me ties into the customization issue that you just talked about as well. It seems like a lot of times when we get into personalized learning, the elements of it that people consider personalized are the things that are almost distractions from what the actual task is, whether it's the environment itself, that there's too much going on, it's too busy, there's too many things to focus on that are not the actual tasks that the kids need to be focused on. And then the customization options and things like that are just, they're bells and whistles that are not inherent to the learning that needs to be happening.
Yes, I think that's a really great way to say. I mean, there's nothing wrong with bells and whistles on some things in and of themselves. But if I buy a car with all the bells and whistles, but it can't leave my yard because it never starts, it doesn't matter.
Yes. Right.
So fundamentally, I need my vehicle to serve the purpose, the primary purpose for which it was intended. And then personalizing in terms of customizing, give me what I want. You really start to realize, well, if learning is already happening, then all of this stuff ends up taking time, and we have very limited school time.
Right.
Families are busy when they're out of school. It's not like because we're going to add a new thing where I get to customize this everything that somehow I magically get more learning time to happen. And so because we're constrained within specific periods of time, we only have so much access to really deep, rich math experiences. We need to make sure that the heart of a student's cognitive load are on the things that matter. And too much of it isn't. And so placement's important because I'm trying to place you in to the piece of learning that's most effective, important for you. So there is obviously some value there. But I think what's even more important than just getting the placement is what happens when you're there. Are you building this mastery-based learning where personalized learning now can be something more about learning at my own pace? Not that I'm going to put out less effort, but different things are going to catch me in different ways. I might go through one learning concept quickly, and life experiences or whatnot, I grab it, and other things I struggle on. And so really to be personalized learning, I think there's a moment here where we need to, in the moment, be providing the right amount of time and the right kind of feedback for learning to happen. And if it takes me a little more time or my misconceptions are a little bit stronger, not a problem because you have the time. And so we don't just say, well, you got 3 questions right, I'm going to give you the harder one. And then I get to the harder one and go, well, you've messed up a couple of times, I'm going to go back to the easier ones.
Right.
I should have already mastered the easy ones. Why am I going back to it? You're asking me to make a connection between the easier one and the harder one that I obviously can't make. Because if I could have made it, I would have. And so this idea of, oh, well, this is too hard. Let me just give you the one that you're successful on takes away the requirement when deep learning happens where I'm in the midst of it and I start to feel that frustration come on and building a desire that turns frustration into that thirst for challenge, which, we say a lot around at Mind is you always want to be turning frustration to a thirst for challenge. It's not about getting rid of frustration. It's about managing that. Because the problems that we need to solve as a society that are going to become increasingly necessary for humans to tackle are tough ones. If they weren't tough, they probably would have already been solved.
We would have solved them already.
We would have solved them.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we have really difficult problems to tackle and solve, and we need to be building up persistence and perseverance on problems that we're stuck on, and we need to have environments that are rich with decision making. See, if you make different decisions than I do, and we both get feedback on it, that's like perfect personalized learning, because I can monitor your decisions, or you can monitor my decisions and provide the feedback when and where and how I might need it. If what I'm doing is calculating and entering an answer, and the response is, yes, you got it, no, you didn't, would you like to try and hint? What decision did I make to make that hint valuable?
Right.
And the answer to that is, I didn't make any decision to make that answer valuable because you got the exact same hint that I did.
Right. And then what feedback am I getting off of that decision to be able to then puzzle through that and kind of problem solve through that?
And what model do I have to even start making the right decisions in? I could just be fundamentally interpreting the problem in some different way. And so creating really powerful models of learning that get to the heart of what's happening, that are rich with decision making, not instructions, where I'm having to think and reason and problem solve time and time again my way through and getting feedback on the choices that I'm making. That feels like a pretty nice poster child, if you will, for personalized learning. And all this other stuff where you can have rewinding or choice or whatnot, you might get some value on there. And I could imagine that there's a chance that they could enhance a solution that looked like that. We do this in everyday life. If we're really stuck on something, we take a break and we go do something else. But if the moments of learning aren't valuable in and of themselves, it doesn't matter which moments I choose.
Right.
They're going to be just as invaluable. And so this is where when I think of personalized learning, I really dive into what is the goal. The goal was not to be the antithesis of one size fits all. It was we found that our approaches to learning wasn't working. And we kind of did a full 180 and tried to do everything else. And we ended up adding fluff to it. The goal is still the same as it always was, is all students can and learn in a deep and meaningful way. And we as a society owe it to ourselves, to our future generation, to our current students, to provide every opportunity for them to maximize learning. So learning still needs to happen. And if that's the ultimate goal, no matter what buzzword we use, under that goal, we can analyze, is this buzzword really being acted appropriately? Or did it just become really popular and then therefore cliche?
What I'm hearing from you as we kind of talk about this stuff is that when you're trying to implement personalized learning, when you're trying to create a school culture that embraces personalized learning, a lot of it is going back to that fundamental question and making sure that you're asking yourself the right questions as you embark upon this journey so that you don't get caught up in the buzzwords, so that you don't get caught up in whatever the flavor of the month is, but you keep coming back to that core concept.
Yes. And this is one of the reasons. I mean, I was in academics for a while and taught at the university level and tutoring businesses and all this sort of piece. And what I found was the brilliance of really focusing on solving a problem. And so Mind exists for that purpose. We are a nonprofit. And so our stakeholders are the students. And so the buzzwords many times bother me a little bit because they get in the way. They become rhetoric in the place of action. And if we could really start to nail down towards solving the problem, we would be putting a pressure on a lot of different groups. We'd be putting pressure on ourselves to really evaluate and make sure what we're doing is successful. And so when you take that approach, personalized learning isn't about technology, even though that's the phrase, it's the common phrase in EdTech. Personalized learning isn't the device. It's not the choice over what I learn and what I don't. That is a personal choice on what I learn, but that doesn't mean that I actually learned it.
Right.
The ability to rewind or learning preferences, none of these things are proving the results. And so in order to prove the results, we really want to go back to the basics. We want, in a way, We want to make sure that students are making a lot of decisions because that is an action. You can measure behavior. You can give feedback on that. A student's decision, when they're making a lot of them over and over, you're getting rapid prototyping on your decisions, just like an entrepreneurial approach where you don't plan out this whole master plan and expect that it's just going to work. 21st century entrepreneurship is requiring more and more to create assumptions and test them as quickly as possible. And make sure that by the time you scale the solution, it actually solved the problem it was trying to scale. That rapid iteration where I'm making a lot of decisions, getting meaningful, informative feedback as I do it within models that allow me to interpret what's happening. We're not just going to throw symbols on the screen and hope that you memorize. All of those pieces are core and crucial elements in learning, and it makes learning personal. When I make a lot of decisions that way, not only am I engaging my mind actively, and creating, I perceive something and I make an action, I get feedback on my choices. I learn very quickly that failure is okay because the natural process of learning, when I don't have instructions to follow, I have to take that explorative mind and know that I don't even know what's happening here. And so I know I'm going to mess up.
Right. It's all part of the process.
Yes. And it's important. It's a hugely important piece of the process. And so as we're evaluating solutions that tout personalized learning, I would encourage all of us to think a little bit about where are they saying they're being personal? Are they just allowing a student to select the environment in which they learn? Are they just adapting based on placement or allowing you to rewind and things like that? You're not going to get maximal results for the precious school time or the time you have at home. And so you're going to create such minimal improvements, if any, that in a way, you're really starting to border on wasting a student's time. Really what you want in personalized learning, and to me, this is one of the big keys, is adapting at the moment of learning. If I am constantly in an environment where like I said, I'm overestimating the answer, I need to start to get feedback that I'm overestimating and start to adjust. At the moment that learning is happening, we need to adapt to the decisions that students are making, and hints aren't going to do that. Having you try it 3 times and say, would you like the hint? And then I don't get it and I have to read a paragraph. It's not going to cut it. The moment of learning has already passed.
Right.
If I've made the choice, then I have to go read a paragraph. I'm delaying the feedback from the decision so far that it's almost ineffective. It needs to be right there at the moment. And that, to me, really embodies what personalized learning should entail. We have the tools and the time and the feedback necessary to make learning a successful experience for myself as a student.
I appreciate you kind of taking the time to take a deep dive into that today, because I know just in talking with you that you are super passionate about that. And there are a lot of misconceptions out there about personalized learning. As you said, the term often gets in the way of what we should really be focusing on. And so I think as we kind of wind down, are there any other final thoughts that you have on that, or takeaways for people who might be listening and sort of thinking about how they're incorporating these concepts into their own environment and how they're maybe as a school kind of embarking on this journey now?
A really important takeaway in general is looking at student behavior. So how are they behaving? Not just are they goofing off behavior, which always happens in a group of students, happens in a small group,
sure,
and in large groups. But student behavior in terms of if they're entering something on a computer, are they just typing a number on the keyboard and then just kind of hitting? Look at what they're doing. Learning by doing is a crucial component, but it doesn't mean that you're always doing well. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And so when we say learning by doing, I really mean learning by doing pertinent tasks, things that are core to where it is that you're going. And so look at student behavior in those moments of learning and start to adapt suggestions and feedback based on that. It's not the answer that the student gives is a result of their behavior. The answer being wrong isn't the core problem. There's something else causing it. And so you can backtrack that usually to how are people interacting with something. And if you can change those interactions in a way that's really powerful, then you're going to see the end result change as well. And so really on everything, every buzzword, everything that is a cliche, everything that was big in the 90s or early 2000s and we're not trying. All of those things we're probably taking a shotgun approach to do something, but really focus on what the goal is, what the problem is we're trying to solve, and what is it the student is doing actively in that process. Are they doing tasks pertinent to the learning? If they're not, you're not going to see the results you want.
Well, I really appreciate you taking time to take this deep dive again today, and I'm sure that we will be having future conversations about whether it be personalized learning or different aspects of subjects that we're tackling here at Mind. I'll be looking forward to sitting down with you again.
I'm really excited. It's going to be a ton of fun.
Thank you for listening to the Inside Our Mind podcast. You can learn more about Mind and find the show notes for this episode at mindresearch.org. You can also follow us on Twitter at mind_research and on Facebook at ggmath. If you'd like to learn more about our visual instructional program, ST Math, visit stmath.com.